my sister's graduation, my own father, a powerful financier, looked at me and told his partners, "Chloe is the family's blue-chip stock." As for Lena, after 12 years in the Navy, she's a failed investment. He had no idea that this failed investment was about to liquidate his entire empire of lies. My name is Lena Harden. I am 30 years old, and for 12 of those years, I've been an officer in the United States Navy. On this particular day, however, I was just a ghost at my own sister's celebration. The late May sun over Washington, D.C. cast a honey-colored glow across the immaculate lawns of Georgetown University, the kind of perfect postcard day that politicians put in their campaign ads. Laughter as light and bubbly as the Veuve Clicquot being served floated through the air. But for me, everything was a cold, flat gray. I stood alone near an old oak tree, clutching a glass of Perrier like it was a lifeline. My simple black theory trousers and silk equipment blouse might as well have been rags amidst the sea of Tom Ford suits and Chanel dresses. My mother, Eleanor, glided past, her eyes sweeping over me with a familiar, barely concealed disappointment. She didn't stop, but her voice, sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the noise. "For God's sake, Lena," she whispered, her painted smile never faltering. "I sent you a check. You couldn't have bought a simple J. Crew dress. You make me feel like I'm hiding a family secret." I didn't answer. I just tightened my grip on the glass, feeling the cool condensation on my skin. The knuckles on my right hand turned white. I was used to it, being the blemish on the otherwise perfect portrait of the Harden family. I focused on my breathing, inhale, exhale, the way they taught us. It was a simple drill, one that kept you centered when the world was trying to tear you apart. For 12 years, it had worked on battlefields. I was finding it barely worked here. Then my father, Richard Harden, made his grand entrance. He didn't walk, he glided, a shark in a bespoke suit, navigating the waters of power with a practiced ease. He was flanked by a senator and a few investors, their faces flushed with sun and champagne. He clapped my sister, Chloe, on the shoulder. She was radiant in her cap and gown, the very picture of a bright future. "This is Chloe," my father announced, his voice booming with the pride of a CEO unveiling a billion-dollar product. "Graduating with honors, the future of international finance." His eyes then flickered to me, standing in the shade of the oak tree. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by an icy contempt. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Every family has its investment portfolio," he said to his guests, loud enough for everyone in our circle to hear. "Chloe, here is our blue-chip stock, an absolute gem." He paused, gesturing vaguely in my direction with his champagne flute. "And Lena?" He shrugged, a theatrical gesture of indifference. "After 12 years in the Navy, she's a failed investment, a total loss." The laughter that followed was strained, but it was still laughter. It felt like a physical blow, a fist to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs. My training kicked in. My face remained a mask, impassive, a blank slate forged in the hell of Bud-ass training. I locked my eyes on the distant spire of Healy Hall, focusing on a single point, a sniper's trick to steady the world when it starts to spin. And that's when the world truly started to spin. It began as a low hum, a distant thrumming that was easy to mistake for the wind. But it grew and grew until it became a deafening roar that ripped through the polite chatter. The classical music from the string quartet screeched to a halt. Heads turned, searching the perfect blue sky. A gray MH-60S Seahawk helicopter, a Navy bird of prey, descended from the heavens. It was a brutal, mechanical beast invading this garden of refined power. The downdraft from its rotors whipped across the lawn like a miniature hurricane, sending graduation caps flying, flipping over cocktail napkins, and making a woman in a Philip Treacy hat shriek as she clamped it to her head. People scattered, their expensive shoes sinking into the soft grass as they ran for cover. With the precise grace of a predator, the helicopter touched down on the main lawn. The side door slid open. 3 soldiers in full combat gear jumped out, their M4 carbines held at a low ready. They didn't point their weapons, but their presence was a statement. They formed a tactical triangle, securing the landing zone. It was a scene straight out of a Michael Bay movie, dropped into the middle of a DC garden party. Then another officer emerged, Captain Mark Dalton. He ignored the chaos, his boots striding purposefully across the grass, straight towards me. In front of my stunned family and hundreds of gawking guests, he snapped to attention and delivered a salute so sharp it could cut glass. "Commander Hardin," he said, his voice clear and strong, "we need you." My father's jaw dropped. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Commander," Richard stammered, the word foreign and unbelievable on his tongue. Dalton's voice boomed over the winding down engines. "Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, Naval Special Warfare Command requires your immediate presence." He turned, handing the university's dean a sealed, official-looking envelope. Then he leaned in close to my ear, his voice dropping to an urgent, low whisper. "This is bad, Commander," he said, the words a cold shock against my skin. "Morch Holdings, your name is on a contract for equipment we never received. You're in a world of shit." I gave him a single sharp nod. The initial shock was already crystallizing into something else, something cold and hard and familiar. Resolve. I turned my back on the frozen tableau of my family. I didn't look at my father's ashen face or my mother's horror. I walked toward the waiting steel bird, each step steady and sure. I was leaving their world behind and stepping back into mine. A new war had just begun. The roar of the Seahawks' engines faded as we banked over the Potomac River, the glittering monuments of Washington, D.C. shrinking below us. My cold resolve from the university lawn remained. A hard shell around the chaos churning inside. Morch Holdings. My name on a fraudulent contract, my father's shocked face. The pieces were a tangled mess, but the feelings they unearthed were old and painfully familiar. As the helicopter carved a path towards the Washington Navy Yard, my mind slipped its leash, pulling me back into the past, back to the moments that had built the map of my family's disappointment. I remember one Christmas Eve in our sprawling Bethesda home. The Fraser fir tree stood sentinel in the living room, touching the cathedral ceiling, dripping with hand-blown glass ornaments and shimmering lights. It was a scene of perfect, magazine-worthy affluence. My sister, Chloe, 17 at the time, let out a squeal of delight as she tore open her gift, the keys to a brand-new metallic blue BMW 3 Series. My father, Richard, beamed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "An investment in your future at Georgetown, sweetheart," he'd said, his voice thick with pride. My gift was next. I was 18, my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy clutched in my hands like a winning lottery ticket. He handed me a simple, cream-colored envelope from his breast pocket. Inside was a check for $500. My mother, Eleanor, leaned in, her smile as brittle as the ornaments on the tree. "For you to buy a few things, dear. Something a little more feminine. They'll teach you how to march at that school, but I do hope you won't forget how to walk in heels." The words were a gentle caress, but the message was a slap. Their love wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. Chloe's was an investment, mine was a consolation prize for having strayed so far from their expectations. The check felt flimsy and insulting in my hand, a stark contrast to the solid, promising weight of the car keys in Chloe's. The memories kept coming, each one a perfectly preserved specimen of their disapproval. I remember the day I told them my plan after graduating from the academy. Not law school, not an MBA. I was applying for SEAL training. We were in my father's study, a room paneled in dark mahogany and lined with leather-bound books he'd never read. He didn't yell. Yelling would have been too emotional, too messy. Instead, he leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers, and looked at me with the cold, appraising stare he usually reserved for underperforming stocks. "Lena," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I had hoped the academy would cure you of these rebellious notions. A daughter of Richard Hardin does not need to prove her worth by rolling around in the mud with men who have no other options in life." He picked up a crystal paperweight, turning it over and over in his hand. "There is no return on investment in that career path. You are actively damaging the family brand." The family brand. That was the word he used, not my happiness, not my calling, not my honor. A brand. A carefully constructed image of East Coast success, of Ivy League degrees and summers in Nantucket. My choice was a stain on that brand, an act of sabotage he couldn't comprehend. To him, my desire to serve, to push myself to the absolute limit of human endurance, was nothing more than a foolish, unprofitable rebellion. The sting of that memory was still fresh when another surfaced. A charity gala at the Chevy Chase Country Club. I was home on leave, and my mother had insisted I attend. "It's important to be seen, Lena," she'd said. I wore a simple navy blue dress, the most formal thing I owned that wasn't a uniform. One of my mother's friends, a woman dripping in diamonds, asked me what I did. Before I could form an answer, my mother had swept in, her laugh a tinkling bell. "Oh, she works for the government," Eleanor said, waving a dismissive hand. "Some boring national security project. You know how it is." Boring national security projects. That was her term for missions in the Horn of Africa, for nights spent hunting pirates in the Arabian Sea, for moments where my life and the lives of my men had hung by a thread. She wasn't protecting my operational security, she was protecting her own social standing. She was ashamed that her daughter was a warrior, not a debutante. In her world, power was wielded in boardrooms and at dinner parties, with soft words and sharp deals, not with a rifle. The helicopter landed with a gentle bump at the Navy Yard. The wave of memories receded, leaving behind the cold, hard sediment of the present. I stepped out into the humid DC air, the smell of the Anacostia River filling my lungs. Dalton was waiting for me. Those old wounds no longer made me want to cry. They were scar tissue now, thick and tough. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build an identity as separate from their world, an identity forged in courage and sacrifice, not cash and connections. And now the very name I had bled for had been dragged into their world of greed and deceit. I looked at Dalton, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "They took my name," I said. "Now I'm going to take everything back." My quest for the truth was no longer just about clearing my name. It was about answering the question that had haunted me for over a decade, a question that now burned hotter than ever. Was the honor I'd chased even real, or was it just another illusion? The past was a ghost. the present was a war room. The sterile, windowless quiet of the skiff, the sensitive compartmented information facility at the Navy Yard was a world away from the manicured lawns of Georgetown. Here there were no pretenses, only data. The air hummed with the low thrum of servers and smelled of stale coffee and ozone. I was back in my element. The emotional turmoil of the past few hours was compartmentalized, locked away. I was no longer a daughter. I was an intelligence officer analyzing a threat. Dalton and I worked in silence, our fingers flying across keyboards. The first hit came up on his screen. His sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. He swiveled his monitor towards me. "Commander, you need to see this." There it was in black and white, a corporate credit line for $2 million opened with a bank in Virginia under the name Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. Dalton pointed a finger at the date on the digital timestamp. "March 15th, 2021, he said, his voice grim. "We have your official deployment logs right here. On that day, you were in a black site in Djibouti, prepping for the mission in Yemen. You were theoretically off-grid, non-existent to the digital world." The air left my lungs. The enemy wasn't on some distant battlefield. The enemy had been at home, sipping bourbon in his leather armchair, while I was dodging bullets on the other side of the world. The betrayal was so audacious, so profoundly personal. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. "Keep digging, Dalton," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "Search my archived email, cross-reference any communication containing the keywords financial, authorization, or power of attorney with my father's name." Dalton's query ran for less than a minute before it flagged a single email. It was from my mother. The subject line was innocuous, "Helping Lena." My blood ran cold. Dalton brought it up on the main screen. "Richard, darling," it read. "Here is that power of attorney form Lena left before her trip. She said she'd be completely off the grid for months. You know how she is. Could you look this over for her? She trusts you so much. Love, L." Attached was a file, Power of Attorney, Jarglina PDF. I stared at that one line. She trusts you so much. My trust, the simple, daughterly trust that I had maintained despite years of emotional neglect, had been weaponized. It had been handed over, gift-wrapped, by my own mother. Whether through sheer naivety or willful ignorance, she had loaded the gun and given it to the man who was now pointing it at my head. "The IP address," I said, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. "The one that uploaded the file for the credit application. Trace it." Dalton's fingers tapped out the command. A map of the DC metro area filled the screen, a red pin blinking ominously. It pulsed over a neighborhood in Bethesda, Maryland. Bradley Manor. I didn't need to see the street name. I knew that place. It was the house where a grand piano I was never allowed to learn sat collecting dust because I lacked the aptitude. It was the house with the library where my father lectured me on my life's failings. It was my parents' house. The last remnants of shock evaporated, replaced by an ice-cold rage that spread through my veins. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated, meticulously planned operation. "Bring up the PDF, Dalton." He opened the attachment from my mother's email. It was a durable power of attorney document, granting Richard Hardin the full, unrestricted legal authority to act on my behalf in all financial matters. And at the bottom of the last page, there was my signature, Lena M. Hardin. It was perfect, too perfect. A flawless digital forgery, likely lifted from a scanned copy of my military service records. He had used my own career, the very thing he despised, as the instrument of my betrayal. For a single, terrifying second, I felt a sensation. I thought I'd trained out of myself years ago. Helplessness. The feeling of being completely and utterly outmaneuvered. Of having my own identity stolen and used against me by the one person who was supposed to protect me. But it only lasted a second. Discipline is a muscle. 12 years of relentless training had made mine iron hard. The helplessness vanished, burned away by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. I pushed back from the console, my chair scraping against the floor. I stood up, my spine ramrod straight. The mission parameters had just become crystal clear. I turned to face Dalton. His eyes were wide with concern, but I met his gaze with a look he knew well. It was the look I got right before a breach. "Dalton," I said, my voice as sharp and cold as steel. "Find me a civilian lawyer, a shark, someone who isn't afraid of blood." The address Dalton gave me wasn't on K Street, the gleaming corridor of lobbyist and big law power. Instead, it led me to DuPont Circle, to a historic brick building with a worn brass plaque that simply read, A. Ruiz, Attorney at Law. The office on the second floor felt less like a law firm and more like a boxer's gym. The air smelled of old paper and strong coffee. The walls were a collage of framed newspaper clippings, headlines detailing victories against monolithic corporations and entrenched government agencies. This was not an office built to impress. It was a war room built to win. Behind a large, cluttered desk sat Angela Ruiz. She was a sharp, energetic woman in her 40s, a former Marine JAG major, and the shark I had asked for. She didn't rise or offer a handshake. She just watched me with intelligent, assessing eyes as I took the seat opposite her. "Commander," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of pleasantries. "I've reviewed the preliminary file Captain Dalton sent over. Let's be clear. This isn't a typical family dispute over an inheritance. This is financial warfare waged against a commissioned officer of the U.S. military. My question for you is simple. Are you prepared to launch a nuclear weapon into your own living room?" I sat straight-backed, the way I was trained. I laid out the facts as I knew them, the credit line, the forged signature, the IP address, presenting the information with the dispassionate precision of a mission briefing. I didn't speak of the pain, the years of quiet humiliation. I spoke only of the data, the evidence, the what, not the why. Angela listened, her gaze never leaving my face. She nodded slowly, taking it all in. When I finished, she leaned forward, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than professional assessment crossed her face. "They see your service as a long vacation, don't they?" she said, the words hitting me with the force of a physical impact. "A convenient absence that allows them to do whatever they please. They have no concept that when you're off the grid, you're in a place where a single wrong decision gets people killed. They don't respect it." I just stared at her. For the first time in my life, someone had articulated the core of my silent wound. It wasn't pity in her voice. It was the clear-eyed understanding of a fellow veteran, a shared language that no one in my family could ever speak. A crack appeared in the armor I'd worn for so long. Angela turned her attention to the scanned power of attorney document on her monitor, her demeanor shifting back to that of a predator. She zoomed in on the signature. "This is a digital lift and paste, clean but amateurish if you know what to look for." She clicked through a few screens, bringing up the file's metadata. "But look here," she pointed. The document was created with a specialized editing software, a program that certain defense contractors favor for creative accounting, a program that's explicitly forbidden on any DoD networked system. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a shark that had just tasted blood in the water. Your father isn't just a crook, Commander. He's a sloppy one. We've got him. This is felony wire fraud. After the meeting, Angela walked me to an independent coffee shop down the street, a place with worn wooden floors and local art on the walls. She ordered 2 black coffees. "Listen to me, Lena," she said, her tone serious now. "This fight is going to get dirty. Your father is a player in this town. He will use his money and his connections to destroy you. He'll paint you as an unstable officer, a disgruntled, ungrateful daughter. He will leak stories. He will try to break you. You need to be ready for that." I looked across the small table, into the eyes of a woman who, like me, had seen the worst the world had to offer and hadn't flinched. The doubt and isolation that had been my constant companions for years began to recede, replaced by a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I had an ally. "Ma'am," I replied, my voice calm and even. "I survived Hell Week in Coronado. Compared to that, a courtroom is a playground." Angela's sharp features softened into a genuine nod of respect. "Good," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "In that case, let's go to war." The brief flicker of hope I'd found in Angela's office was a fragile thing, a single candle in a hurricane. I knew the countermove was coming. In my world, when you identify a threat, you anticipate its course of action, its most likely avenue of attack. I had prepared myself for a legal onslaught, for corporate maneuvering. I just didn't expect the attack to come cloaked in the guise of maternal love. I was in my temporary apartment in Alexandria, a sterile corporate rental that smelled of new carpet and paint, going over a stack of documents with Angela on speakerphone. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the screen lighting up with a name I knew by heart. "Mom." I held up a finger to the speakerphone, signaling for Angela to hold, then took a slow, deliberate breath. A tactical pause before engagement. I answered. "Lena, darling." Eleanor's voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she usually reserved for the wives of my father's most important clients. It was a weaponized warmth. "I heard you were back in D.C. Why haven't you called? Your father and I have been so worried." I felt a familiar, bitter taste in the back of my throat. "Worried about what, Mom?" I asked, my own voice colder than I intended. "My well-being or the state of Dad's investment portfolio?" A sharp, wounded silence stretched across the line, so profound I could almost hear her calculating her next move, recalibrating her attack. Then a wounded tremor entered her voice. A masterful performance. "Lena, don't be like that. We're a family. I know there have been some misunderstandings, but your father only ever wants what's best for you. He was just trying to protect you." "Meet me for lunch," she insisted, her voice now pleading. "Please, just the 2 of us, the Capitol Grill, my treat." I knew it was a trap. The Capitol Grill on Pennsylvania Avenue was my father's unofficial office, a den of dark wood, porterhouse steaks, and backroom deals. It was enemy territory. My tactical mind screamed at me to refuse, to keep the engagement on my own terms. But a small, foolish part of me, a part I thought I'd killed off years ago, during the frozen nights of Hell Week, still wanted to believe. It was the ghost of the little girl who just wanted her mother. I agreed. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. A low hum of powerful men talking about money. The clinking of heavy silverware on starched white linen. The rich smell of seared beef and expensive wine. Eleanor was already seated at a prime booth, a glass of buttery Chardonnay in hand. She didn't hug me. She offered an air kiss that landed somewhere near my ear. Her perfume, Chanel No. 5, enveloping me in a cloud of manufactured elegance. For the first 30 minutes, she didn't mention the fraud. She performed a flawless monologue about Chloe's brilliant job prospects, the upcoming DC charity season, and the damaging rumors that were starting to circulate around the Chevy Chase Club. It was a masterclass in avoidance, a strategic deployment of trivialities designed to soften the target. Then, as the waiter cleared our untouched salad plates, she leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hand covering mine on the tablecloth. Her touch was as cold as marble. "Darling," she said, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "Your father, he made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He's heartbroken and he admits that. But if you bring this to light, you will destroy all of us. You'll destroy Chloe. Her career will be over before it begins. Do you really want your sister, your innocent sister, to pay the price for this?" I pulled my hand away, as if from a flame. The emotional blackmail was so blatant, so textbook. "Are you asking me to stay silent to protect a criminal, Mom?" The tears now streamed down her cheeks, perfectly contained, never threatening her immaculate makeup. "I am asking you to be a daughter." Her voice rose, laced with a righteous indignation that was utterly false. "Your father raised you, he educated you, he gave you everything. You owe him this. You chose your own life. You abandoned this family to go play soldier. The least you can do, for once, is think of us." And there it was, the pivot, the classic victim blame reversal. In her narrative, I wasn't the one whose identity was stolen and whose honor was tarnished. I was the ungrateful child, the one who had abandoned them. My father's felony was just a mistake, but my pursuit of justice was a malicious betrayal. The weight of responsibility, as always in the Hardin family, was being placed squarely on my shoulders. Did she really believe what she was saying, or was this just another performance in a lifetime of them? Looking at her, I realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity that it didn't matter. The effect was the same. I stood up. My movements were calm, deliberate. I took 2 $50 bills from my wallet and placed them on the table, more than enough to cover my Caesar salad and iced tea. I looked directly into my mother's tear-filled eyes, but for the first time I felt no pain. No residual sting of her disapproval, only a profound, bottomless pity for this woman who valued appearances more than truth. "I've already paid my debt to this family, Mom," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying with an authority that made her flinch. "I paid it with my youth. I paid it with scars you'll never see. I nearly paid it with my life. On more than one occasion, my account is settled." I let that hang in the air for a moment, letting the finality of it sink in. "I owe him only one thing now," I finished, "a fair trial." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I left her there, a solitary tragic figure in her expensive suit, her carefully constructed performance collapsing around her amidst the clatter of silverware and the quiet murmur of power. It was a declaration of war, and I knew with absolute certainty that the enemy's next attack would not be so subtle. The morning after the disastrous lunch with my mother, my phone buzzed with a text from Dalton. It wasn't a message, just a link. My hand was steady as I tapped it, the page-loaded Politico playbook, the daily newsletter that every senator, lobbyist, and power player in D.C. reads with their morning coffee. The headline was discreet, yet devastating. A rift in a D.C. power family? The article didn't use our names. It didn't have to. It spoke of a prominent financier on K Street and his daughter, a decorated but troubled military officer. It whispered of baseless accusations and hinted that the daughter was showing signs of severe psychological distress after her years of service. It didn't use the letters PTSD, but the implication was a poisoned dart, aimed with precision. He was trying to discredit me by weaponizing my service. He was painting me as a broken soldier, a crazy veteran, trying to extort her loving family. My father had launched his counteroffensive, and it was dirty. The rage that filled me was white hot. He had attacked the one thing I had built for myself, the one thing that was mine and mine alone, my honor as an officer. As if on cue, there was a frantic pounding on my apartment door. I wrenched it open to find Chloe standing there, her face tear-streaked, clutching a printout of the article. "What did you do, Lena?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're destroying this family. Dad said you were sick, that he was trying to help you, and you do this." I looked at my sister, at her perfect, privileged world, a world built on a foundation of lies she never had to see. And something inside me finally broke. The years of disciplined silence, of swallowing insults, of turning the other cheek, it all shattered. "Help me?" The words were a low growl, torn from a place of pure fury. He's helping me by stealing my identity? By using my name to get into bed with corrupt defense contractors? Your Georgetown tuition, Chloe, your new BMW. This entire life you think you've earned was paid for with my honor. It was all funded by a lie with my name on it. The color drained from her face. She stared at me, speechless, as if seeing me for the first time. Not the quiet, awkward older sister, but a stranger filled with a terrifying rage. She took a step back, turned, and fled. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my knuckles white against the wood. That night, the anger gave way to a crushing weight. I sat on the floor of my dark apartment, the city lights of Alexandria blinking indifferently outside my window. I had faced down terrorists, pirates, warlords. I had survived things that were supposed to break a person, but nothing had prepared me for the abject cruelty of my own family. For the first time, I felt truly, completely alone, cornered by an enemy I couldn't fight with a weapon or a plan. He was using his power, his influence, his lies. He was erasing me. My mind drifted to a book a mentor, a wise old Master Chief, had given me years ago. It was by Brené Brown. I fumbled for the light switch, found the book on the small nightstand, and flipped through the pages until I found the passage he had underlined for me. The words seemed to lift off the page. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Something shifted inside me. A profound clarity cut through the despair. That's what he was doing. My father was the critic on the sidelines, pointing and whispering, trying to push me out of the arena because he was terrified of the woman who was actually in it. He was afraid of a fight on equal terms. Have you ever felt that? Pushed into a corner by the very people who were supposed to have your back? Have you ever had your story stolen, your truth twisted, until you were made to look like the villain in your own life? They think the darkness will swallow you whole. They count on your silence, but they forget one thing. For some of us, the darkness is where we work best, and the silence is about to be broken by a truth louder than thunder. I stood up, the exhaustion replaced by a cold, energizing fury. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling lights of the DC metro area. He would not win. He would not define me. I was going to step into that arena, not as a victim, but as a warrior. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Angela," I said when she answered, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Cancel any negotiations. We're taking this to trial. I want him to face me in public. I want the world to know exactly what Richard Harden did." I took a breath. I swear it. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The real war had just begun. My vow to Angela wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a mission directive. The moment I hung up the phone, the rage cooled into a familiar, focused calm. This was no longer a family drama. This was an operation. The objective, dismantle my father's empire of lies. The means, irrefutable proof. The first step was to establish an unbreachable timeline. I flew to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California. Stepping onto the base felt like coming home. The salty Pacific air, the rhythmic chants of trainees on the grinder. It was the world where I made sense, but I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for ammunition. Dalton met me outside the administrative building. Together, we walked into the records archive, a secure, climate-controlled vault that held the unfiltered history of my career. I presented my credentials to the chief petty officer on duty. "I need my complete deployment logs and all fit reps for the last 10 years, I said. The chief, a man with 20 years of service in his eyes, looked at me with professional curiosity, but complied without question. He had no idea the dry, bureaucratic documents he was pulling were about to become explosive charges in a different kind of war. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of a small conference room, Dalton and I laid out the files. It was a decade of my life, reduced to dates, coordinates, and performance evaluations. A world of black and white, of verified facts. We cross-referenced every fraudulent transaction Angela had uncovered. March 15, 2021. The $2 million credit line was signed in a bank in Richmond, Virginia. My fit rep for that period stated, "LCDR Harden led a high-risk reconnaissance mission at coordinates, redacted, Gulf of Aden, September 10, 2022. A brokerage account was opened in my name in Delaware. My deployment log confirmed, engaged in joint training exercises with French GIGN forces, French Alps." One by one, every lie my father had constructed was smashed against the granite wall of military fact. There was a cold, satisfying certainty to it. He had built his case on my absence, on the secrecy of my life. He never imagined that my secret life was the most meticulously documented one on the planet. While I was gathering my alibis, Angela was on the offensive in DC. She called me late one night, her voice electric with discovery. "I've got another one, Lena, a shell corporation. Meridian Impact LLC, registered in Delaware, the go-to state for corporate anonymity." "What's the connection?" I asked. "It's been receiving small consulting payments from a subsidiary of Morch Holdings, and the sole managing member, Richard Harden." She wasn't finished. "It gets worse. To open the corporate bank account, he needed a secondary form of ID. He submitted a scanned copy of a Georgia driver's license, in your name." I had never even been to Georgia, except to change planes at the Atlanta airport. "The IP address that uploaded the file," Angela continued, her voice grim, "traced back to his office building on K Street. He didn't just steal your identity, Lena. He created an entirely new one for you, a ghost he could control." The final piece of the puzzle came from Dalton. He was reviewing old communication logs when he remembered something. "Years ago, Commander," he said, looking up from his laptop, "your life insurance policy, There was an issue with the beneficiary designation while you were deployed. I had to call your emergency contact. My father. Calls involving sensitive personnel data are automatically recorded for security purposes, Dalton said, a slow grin spreading across his face. We made the request through official channels to the NCIS. A few hours later, a secured audio file landed in my inbox. We listened in the quiet of the conference room. We heard the voice of a younger Dalton. I need to confirm some information with Lieutenant Commander Hardin's legal power of attorney. And then, my father's voice, smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. This is Richard Hardin. I'm her power of attorney. You can speak with me. Click. It was the sound of a bear trap snapping shut. A cold smile touched my lips. The evidence was compiled, cross-referenced, and verified. The lies, the forgeries, the sheer breathtaking arrogance of it all. It was all there, a perfect chain of evidence. I looked at Dalton. He just nodded. He knew. We have enough ammo, Dalton, I said, closing my laptop. Time to load the magazines. The hearing room for the Federal Civilian Review Board was a place designed to intimidate. It was all dark mahogany, muted gray carpet, and heavy silence, presided over by a panel of 3 stone-faced adjudicators. The air was cold and still. My father, Richard Hardin, sat at the respondents' table, flanked by a team of lawyers, whose suits probably cost more than my car. He looked relaxed, confident, even bored. He was a shark in his natural habitat, a master of a world governed by loopholes and plausible deniability. He nodded politely to the panel, a man among his peers. Then the doors at the back of the room opened and I walked in. The quiet murmur of the room died instantly. Every head turned. I wasn't wearing a business suit. I wasn't dressed as a civilian plaintiff. I was wearing my Navy service dress blues, the formal high-collared uniform of dark navy blue, adorned with the full array of ribbons and medals I had earned over 12 years. The gold stripes of a lieutenant commander shone on my sleeves. The seal trident, my most sacred symbol, was pinned over my heart. I was not a daughter suing her father. I was a commander in the United States Navy, reporting a crime. I saw a flicker of something in my father's eyes, not fear, not yet, but annoyance, a crack in his composure. This was not the narrative he had prepared for. I walked with a steady, measured pace to the petitioner's table and took my seat beside Angela. I didn't look at him. I looked at the panel. Angela rose. She was a force of nature, calm and commanding. "Good morning, members of the board," she began. "My client, Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, is here today, not to air a family grievance, but to report a grave series of federal offenses that used her military service and her identity as a weapon against her." She began her presentation, a systematic, relentless barrage of facts. Each piece of evidence was a missile launched at my father's fortress of lies. First, the world map appeared on the large screen behind the panel. A pin marked my location in the Gulf of Aden. On March 15, 2021, Angela stated, her voice sharp, when a $2 million line of credit was opened in my client's name in Virginia, LCDR, Hardin was here, leading a high-risk counter-piracy operation. Another pin appeared in the French Alps. When a brokerage account was opened in her name, she was here, conducting joint training. One by one, she laid out the documents. The forged power of attorney, the articles of incorporation for the shell company, Meridian Impact LLC. The fake Georgia driver's license, its metadata showing it was uploaded from an IP address registered to my father's K Street office. The room grew colder, the silence heavier. I could feel my father's gaze on me, but I refused to meet it. My focus remained on the evidence, on the cold, hard truth being laid bare. Angela saved the core of the fraud for last. The respondent, Mr. Hardin, has claimed through his counsel that these actions, while perhaps unorthodox, were those of a concerned father trying to protect his daughter's assets while she served in dangerous places. She paused, letting the absurdity of the statement hang in the air. She turned to look directly at my father. The question before this board is a simple one. Protect them from what? My father's lead counsel, a man with silver hair and a golden tan, stood up. Objection, this is speculation. Sustained, the lead adjudicator said, but his eyes were fixed on Angela. Let me rephrase, Angela said smoothly. Let's examine the nature of this protection. My father decided it was time for his own performance. He stood, his expression a carefully crafted mask of wounded sincerity. He addressed the panel as if they were old friends at the country club. Gentlemen, my daughter, she chose a difficult, dangerous life. A life I couldn't understand. I only wanted to ensure she had a future to come home to. If I was overzealous, it was only because of a father's love. That was my cue. I remained seated, but I turned my head slightly to face him for the first time. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the room with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. My future? I asked, holding his gaze. You stole my present to finance your own. You used my name, the name I swore an oath to defend, to enrich yourself. You did that without me, without my consent, without my knowledge. I leaned forward slightly. That doesn't make you my protector, Mr. Hardin. It makes you a thief. He flinched as if I'd struck him. But Angela wasn't done. She had saved the kill shot for last. One final piece of this protection puzzle, she said, her voice dropping for dramatic effect. She projected a new document onto the screen. It was the paperwork for another secret investment account, also opened in my name. This account lists a sole beneficiary in the event that something were to happen to Elsie Dr. Hardin during one of her dangerous deployments. The camera zoomed in on the beneficiary line. The name was there, in crisp, clear type, Chloe A. Hardin. A collective gasp went through the small audience section. I glanced back. My mother's face was a mask of horror. And Chloe was staring at the screen, her face utterly white with shock. The blood had drained from it, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. Her perfect world, her belief in her golden status, her unwavering faith in her father, it all shattered in that single silent moment. She wasn't the prized asset, she was the exit strategy, the insurance policy, another pawn in his game. She turned her head slowly, her wide, disbelieving eyes fixing on our father. Her lips parted and a single, heartbroken whisper escaped, a sound that seemed to echo in the dead silent room. You used me. It was the final blow, not from me, not from Angela, but from his own favored child. The lie had consumed everything, even its own creation. The facade of the powerful, loving father crumbled into dust. Richard Hardin stared at Chloe, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. His confidence, his arrogance, his entire curated persona evaporated. He staggered back, collapsing into his chair. He buried his face in his hands, a broken man. He had lost, not to a team of lawyers. He had been defeated by a single undeniable truth. The hearing ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating implosion of a man who had believed himself invincible. There was a strange, hollow stillness in the air as Angela and I packed our briefcases. The panel had adjourned, My father's lawyers were whispering in hushed, urgent tones, and my family was a frozen tableau of shock at the back of the room. Victory felt less like a celebration and more like the profound, bone-deep exhaustion after a long, grueling mission. As we were leaving, my father intercepted me in the quiet, marble-floored hallway. The calculated confidence he wore like a tailored suit was gone, stripped away, leaving behind a desperate, hollowed-out man I barely recognized. His shoulders were slumped. His face, usually tan and healthy, was a pasty gray. "Lena," he rasped, his voice raw and unfamiliar. "We can fix this. Please, I'll give it all back. Every cent. We can fix this." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt a stunning lack of emotion. Not the hatred I might have expected, not the anger that had fueled me, not even the satisfaction of victory. Just a vast, cold emptiness, like a crater where a building used to be. "You can't give back 12 years, Dad," I said, my voice even and dispassionate. "You can't give back the trust you shattered. You can't restore the honor you tried to auction off to the highest bidder." My mother and Chloe stood at the far end of the hall, like statues in a forgotten museum, unable to move closer, unable to look away. I kept my eyes locked on him. "You taught me that everything is an investment, a cold calculation of profit and loss." I paused, letting the weight of his own philosophy settle between us. "And today I'm cutting my losses." I walked past him. His hand twitched as if to reach out, but he didn't. My footsteps echoed in the silence. I didn't look back. A week later, the official fallout began, delivered with the cold, impersonal efficiency of the federal government. The Department of Justice issued a formal press release. The words were clinical, brutal, and public. "Richard Harden has been indicted on charges of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States." The news spread like wildfire. His assets were frozen by federal marshals. His partners abandoned him. The phones at his firm stopped ringing. The Harden empire, a monument to financial wizardry, crumbled overnight. I saw the headlines on Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal, the very publications that had once lauded his genius. Now they were dissecting his downfall with a detached journalistic glee. Reading the words, I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt quiet, a heavy, profound sense of relief, as if a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying for my entire life had finally, irrevocably, been lifted. The personal fallout came via a phone call a few days after that. It was Chloe. Her voice was broken, choked with sobs that sounded raw and new to her. "I resigned," she whispered into the phone. Everyone at the firm looks at me like I was part of it, like I'm a criminal." She was crying now, the wrenching, helpless sobs of someone whose world had been pulverized. "I didn't know, Lena. I swear on my life, I didn't know anything." I believed her. I truly did. That was the tragedy of it. I listened to her cry for a long moment, the sound scraping against my own raw nerves. There was no room for false comfort now. "I know you didn't, Chloe," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But ignorance isn't innocence. It's just a privilege you had that was paid for with my truth." I let her absorb the sting of that. The silence was filled only with her ragged breathing. "You have to build your own life now, Chloe, from the ground up, with your own 2 hands. It's the only way." I ended the call. It felt cruel, like abandoning a soldier on the battlefield, but it was a necessary cruelty. It was the last, hardest lesson our family had to offer. You can't live your life on a foundation built by someone else's lies. That night, Back in the sterile quiet of my Alexandria apartment, the reality of my victory finally settled in, and it had the bitter, metallic taste of ashes. I sat in the dark for hours, just watching the distant, indifferent lights of the city. I had won. I had exposed the truth. I had reclaimed my name. But in doing so, I had systematically dismantled my own family. The demolition was complete. There was nothing left but rubble. I thought of the chaplain on our team, a good man who had seen more than his share of broken things. He was fond of quoting the Bible, not to preach, but to find anchors in the storm. A line came to me then, from the Gospel of John. "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." I had found the truth, and I was, in a way, free. Free from the crushing weight of their expectations, free from the quiet shame, free from the suffocating web of lies. But as I sat there in the silence of that empty room, I realized that freedom felt a lot like loneliness. The battle to clear my name was over, but a new one, a quieter, more difficult one, was just beginning. I had to learn how to live in this new, unburdened silence. I had to figure out what home and family were supposed to mean now, when the old definitions had been burned to the ground. 6 months later, I stood in a place far removed from any courtroom or corporate office. I stood in the Hall of Heroes at the Pentagon, a sacred space where the names of America's bravest are enshrined. The air here was different, hallowed, heavy, with sacrifice and honor. I wasn't in my service dress blues. At my own request, I wore my desert combat uniform, the sandy, worn fatigues of a warrior. This honor wasn't for a commander at a desk, it was for a SEAL in the field. The Secretary of the Navy stood before me, reading a citation for an act of valor that had remained classified until now. He spoke of a mission in Yemen years ago, the very mission I was on when my father was busy forging my name on fraudulent contracts. The details were sparse, as they had to be, but they spoke of a firefight, a wounded teammate, a decision made under impossible pressure. As he finished, he took the silver star from its velvet box and pinned it to my chest. The weight of it was small, but its significance was immense. Camera flashes popped like distant gunfire. I looked out into the crowd of starched uniforms and serious faces, and I found them. Dalton, Angela, a few of the guys from my team. They weren't clapping loudly, they were just standing there, smiling. I was invited to the podium. I had no prepared remarks. I looked out at the audience, the generals, the admirals, the government officials, the families, and I spoke from the heart. I was taught, I began, my voice clear and steady, that a special operator is a quiet professional, that the greatest honor is to complete the mission with no one ever knowing your name. For a long time, I believed that was the only truth. I paused, letting the words settle. But I've learned another lesson. I've learned that silence sometimes isn't strength. Sometimes it's complicity. Silence can erase the truth. Silence can erase a person. My gaze drifted to my teammates. People talk about family legacy, about the name you inherit, but I believe a real legacy isn't what's handed to you. It's what you build with your own sweat and blood and tears. It's forged in the choices you make in the dark when no one is watching. I looked back at the assembled crowd. I stand here today not because I am perfect, but because I refuse to disappear. I am not the daughter of a financier. I am Lieutenant Commander Lena Hardin, United States Navy, and I have written my own name in the book. A wave of applause, strong and sustained, filled the hall. For the first time, it felt like it was for me, for the real me. Later that evening, I skipped the formal reception. Instead, I met my team at a small, unassuming veterans bar in Arlington, the kind of place with faded flags on the walls and the smell of spilled beer and old stories in the air. We crowded into a worn wooden booth. There was no talk of the trial, no mention of Richard Hardin. We just drank our Sam Adams, traded old sea stories, and laughed. The easy, unburdened laughter of brothers in arms. I took the small velvet box from my pocket and opened it. The silver star gleamed under the dim bar lights. I didn't put it away. I didn't place it in a glass case. I set it gently on the scratched surface of the table, right next to a faded dog-eared photograph of our team, taken in the desert sun after a long mission. I looked at the familiar, smiling faces in the picture, the men who had shared their last drops of water with me, who had trusted me with their lives. This was my legacy. This was my family. It was a profound realization. The journey hadn't just been about seeking justice. It had been about discovering what truly mattered. It wasn't about proving my worth to those who would never see it. It was about honoring the bonds forged in fire, the loyalty of those who had stood by me when the world turned its back. The message of my own life, I realized, was simple. Never let anyone else hold the pen. A true legacy isn't the name you're given, but the one you earn. I took a long drink of my beer, the cold glass a welcome comfort in my hand. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was finally home. My journey to this moment, to this feeling of being home, was about finding my truth and my voice, and I know I'm not the only one who has had to fight that battle. Your story, your journey, has value. It deserves to be heard. If this resonated with you, I invite you to share a part of your own story in the comments. Let's build a community where every voice is honored. And if you want to hear more true stories of resilience and justice, please subscribe and become a part of our mission.